Welcome back to the last of our series of 4 short films intended for anybody who's been asked to play the piano or the organ for a church service. And as before, what we're talking about today is intended to make the most of the technique and the abilities that you've already got, and to make the whole experience less nerve-wracking, more successful, and more enjoyable for you and for the congregation alike. In the last episode, we looked at the verses of hymns, or at least we looked at the music of the verses of hymns. And that actually is only half the story. A hymn is music and text together. And we actually have to take account of the text as well when we're playing. Obviously, having a text means that there are several verses and you have to keep track of how many verses there are and how many you've played. But there's actually more to it than just that. So all that means, of course, that it's not enough to say, well, this hymn has got 5 verses, so I'm going to play the tune 5 times over. People assume sometimes that that is all the musician has to do, but it isn't, and we're going to look at some other reasons why not, and at what we have to do to take account of the text itself. So the first of these ways is the general meaning of the words. You know, it's obvious that we're going to play, for example, Fight the Good Fight differently from how we're going to play There Is a Green Hill Far Away. Although both melodies are in 4/4 time, they're both in D major, they're both written by English composers around the turn of the 18th to the 19th century, but they couldn't be more different. We're going to play one as a vigorous kind of march and the other as a reflective and lyrical melody. And it's not just a question of the style, but also the tempo, and for an organist, the choice of stops. Some hymns are going to be brighter than others. But most hymns have a sense of development. They take you from one place to another. Take, for example, Abide With Me. By the time we get to verse 5, we're talking about the cross pointing to the skies and the morning breaking in heaven's glory. But verse 1 is about evening falling and joys growing dim. For an organist, again, that's a relatively straightforward thing. We can add the odd stop from verse to verse and build the thing up as we go along. Some hymns are a little more complicated in terms of development. An example is I Cannot Tell, where the first half of each verse starts I cannot tell, da-da-da-da-da, and the second half of the verse starts, but this I know. And there it would be very natural to want to play, for example, the first half of each verse on one manual and the second half of each verse on another manual with slightly contrasting registrations to reflect that change of mood between the halves of each verse. The second way we have to relate to the words is when a hymn is metrically irregular, so the lengths of the lines are different from verse to verse. It happens surprisingly often, actually. A good example is the old hymn, God is Working His Purpose Out. Here it is, and you can see it's slightly different from verse to verse. It's not such a huge problem. People will get by somehow or other, although in fact it was subsequently adapted and rewritten to get rid of those irregularities. But there are a number of hymns where this kind of thing happens to a lesser extent. Just thinking about this, it suddenly occurs to me that there was a hymn in my childhood, and I doubt if anybody sings it anymore, but we had it every evensong in our village church where I was playing when I was still a small child. And that was a hymn called Hail Gladdening Light. I'll try and find a copy and show it here. And that was really an extreme example of irregular lines. It functions almost as a chant. I'd completely forgotten about it until just now. And as I say, you'll probably never have to use it. I doubt if anybody sings it anymore. But for me, it brings back these rather rosy-tinted, cosy memories of long ago services. Okay, so that's not such a huge problem or even such a common thing unless you happen to end up with something like Hail Gladdening Light. But it's something which we need to be vaguely aware of. But the third way in which we're going to need to relate to the words is more common still, and I'll call it, for the sake of a name, Room to Deny Ourselves a Road. Which hymn does that come from? Well, we'll come back to that a little later. What we're talking about here is not irregular meter, but irregular punctuation within the lines. And I can hear you saying it now. What on earth's he talking about punctuation for? But actually, it is something which does affect the hymn very much and affects us and the way we play it. I'll show you why. Here's a straightforward and common example, The Lord's My Shepherd. And I'll play the middle two lines of 3 of the verses and put the text up for you to see. So as you can see, the breaks in the text do not always correspond to the breaks to the ends of the lines of music. So if you play each verse identically, you are actually making mincemeat out of the text. So that line we quoted earlier, room to deny ourselves a road, which hymn is it from? It's verse 4 of New Every Morning is the Love, and it reads, room to deny ourselves, comma, a road to bring us daily nearer God. So how do we manage all that? How do we manage not only to keep track of how many verses there are and how many we've played, but even of what the words are within each verse? And the best answer to that, I'm really sorry to say, is something that's going to be really difficult and a real challenge, and is going to take a lot of work and a lot of practice to actually get right. I did promise in these films that I would make life easier for you, and here I am making life much more difficult. But this is the one thing which is going to be an investment which will transform the way in which you play hymns forever. So this terrible thing which I'm going to recommend is to actually sing the words while you're playing. You can sing them very quietly to yourself, or you can sing them out loud if you're confident enough to do that. But the point is to actually sing the words. So managing to read the text of the words at the same time as playing the music all seems too much to cope with the first 100 times or so that you do it. But if you persevere, you keep going, keep trying, don't give up, then it pays real dividends. Why is that? Well, first of all, you will feel confident to put in those commas and to make sense of the words. You'll also never lose track of where you are in the hymn. You won't lose count of how many verses you've played because you'll know perfectly well. It's possible, of course, just to make a note in pencil of the problems that you're going to encounter in each verse and just be aware of them. But if you are actually following the words, then it all becomes so very, very much easier. But even more than that, doing it makes you feel as though you've actually got a handle on what you're doing rather than just trying to survive it. It makes you feel that you are actually putting across something for the congregation. It gives you a new perspective on what you're doing and makes you feel more in control. In fact, it's fair to say that the most important things of all about playing hymns can't be expressed in terms of rules. I know that I've sat here in 4 episodes and said you must do this and you must do that and you must do the other. But there is something far more important than what you do, and that is what you feel. That you are actually putting across something that you believe in. And if you can feel that, then you are achieving far more than just getting the technicalities right. So I said in the first episode that you must never let anybody say to you that you're not good enough to do this. That you are the person the congregation has chosen to do this work, and you are actually agreeing to do it. And so you're doing a wonderful thing. So what I'm hoping for these 4 episodes is that they can give you some confidence by providing some straightforward tools to make life easier, as well as giving you a sense of direction, a sense of purpose in what we're doing. And in that way we can feel that we're on the same team as the congregation, and that this whole business of accompanying hymns or leading hymns is not as difficult and is far more satisfying than it first appears. So I wish you every joy as you carry on this great work that you're doing.